Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on today's episode we're going to be getting deeper into the Deathly Dervish build we started last week. This is part 2 of the guide to the Dervish and it'll be focused on level 50 and upwards. So if you haven't watched part 1, go check that video out first, since that's got all of the breakdowns for your abilities in this build. This video will be mainly focused on devotions as well as early monster infrequent gear drops and big power spikes before you get into elite. This video has everything to get you comfy with the way that the build works as you gear up towards ultimate difficulty. We'll start with devotions because these are going to end up in 2 parts. Since devotions require you to unlock shrines, completing all of them is going to be locked behind the progress that you make in game. At level 50, you should be making your way towards the Coven in Ugnenbog, so you'll share the same number of points as me in this video. That means all these devotions and the order that they come in should be pretty easily attainable. Now, to set us off on our journey to Devotion Town, we're going to start with the primordial devotions. Those are going to be your blue devotion points, and this is actually going to come with a pretty decent power spike early on in order to help you push through early levels as well as 50 and beyond. Because it's so easy to fill up how much we need on this devotion path, we're going to get it out early and call it a day. That being said, your first devotion will go into the blue crossroads to get you some defensive ability, and then after that you are going to put 5 more devotion points into the tsunami constellation that is directly above it. Tsunami is going to be giving you an increase to cold damage. You're going to be getting spirit and defensive ability along with some physique, frostburn damage, and you get access to the tsunami attack, which is what the devotion gives you at its completion. What Tsunami will do when you are able to activate it, which is a 35% chance on attack when you equip it to Ring of Steel, is it is going to launch a wave that will do cold, lightning, and frostburn damage along with some weapon damage, and it has a chance to either blind or silence the targets that get hit by it. Tsunami is an absolutely brilliant addition to the AoE damage that this kit is going to do, and once we make it to the late game where we can convert a lot of our damage into cold, it is just going to be that much more of a nuke when it comes to our Ring of Steel really cutting down big swaths of enemies. If you prefer in the early game, you can equip this to Vire's Might. It'll still fire off even if your charge has taken place, because you should have at least 1 point into Volcanic Stride. Volcanic Stride is the ability that leaves the flame carpet behind you when you are using Vire's Might, and that can also activate Tsunami, so you can fire off multiple Tsunamis if the case allows for it. The reason that we have it equipped to Ring of Steel, though, in this video is because we are going to attach Vire's Might to one of our later devotions, so just remember that. Ultimately, it's going to be preference which one of these you equip to where, but for the time being, just remember Ring of Steel is how I have it in this video. Now, after completing Tsunami, you should have 6 total points into Primordial, and that is all that you are going to need. That is going to get you access to a later devotion that is also in the cold damage variety, and is going to be very, very helpful. After you've completed Tsunami, though, move down to your pink crossroads, which is your Chaos Tree, and that is going to give you a 5% increase to your health. It's obviously not super flashy, but having a percentage increase to your not death meter is always a good thing to have. Now, once you put that single point into the Crossroads devotion, you are going to unlock Mantis. And the Mantis constellation is important for 2 reasons. The first, the stats that it gives you are going to be very good, and they're going to translate well either early or late game. You're going to get a flat 20 armor, which is pretty helpful in the early game. You'll get bumps to piercing damage and defensive ability, But more importantly, you'll be getting 10% elemental resistance with just this devotion and 1 point into it. You also get energy regen, which is something important for this build because it does get rather energy hungry, and the more that you can mitigate that, the better. But finally, more importantly than anything else in this constellation, is a 3% physical resistance. That won't be as impactful in the early game as it will be in the late game. Remember, once you hit ultimate, your physical resist caps out at 40%, so the more that you can get into that with devotions, the easier it will be to survive more physical damage in ultimate. The second reason that Mantis is so important is because it is going to unlock the Ascendant tree, which is your purple devotions. That tree is going to get you into the next leg of what we want for our endgame devotions, and that is the Leviathan. We're not going to be able to get to the Leviathan in this video because the number of points required to get down there while also having Tsunami is just not possible. I tried a whole bunch of different combinations to make it work, but I couldn't get both the way that I wanted to, so we're going to have to gather up a couple more, and that'll likely take us into Elite for some more devotion farming. However, since we have the Ascendant tree unlocked now, we're going to start picking up some of those purple devotions, and we're going to start with Toad. Toad it's got some wasted stats. I'm not going to lie to you, but because it is going to give you a constellation bonus for both your Ascendant and Eldritch trees. This means you're going to get 3 points of each of those devotion trees, and since both of those are necessary for Leviathan, this constellation is worth it for basically that alone. That said though, you're still going to get Vitality Resistance, which is 8%, nice and easy. You'll get Offensive Ability and Spirit. You'll get some flat health, and you are going to get a percentage of your attack damage converted to health. It's only 3%, so obviously it's not going to stack very well unless you have some type of gear that is also funneling that for the kit, but that's not the whole purpose of this build, so it's not something you should be relying on a whole lot. You'll also get a % damage increase to beasts, which is good, but it's only specific to one faction, so it's kind of the crux of also Anatomy of Murder when it comes to the Nightblade tree. That talent will give you an increase in damage to humans, but it's only humans. This is for beasts and only beasts. So it is a decent increase in the damage that you can do to them, but don't rely on it for anything specific. Toad in and of itself, really the best thing about it is just the vitality resistance that it's giving to you, and the 3 points into the Ascendant tree and 3 points into the Eldritch tree that we're going to need later on. That said, the Eldritch tree that this is going to unlock for us is going to make our next devotion even possible, and that is Quill. Now, Quill, just like Toad, is a little bit unassuming. The stats that it's going to give you may not jump right out of you, and there's no activatable ability that comes with it, so you're probably looking at it like this is kind of boring. The reason this is going to be important, not only for the Aether resist, just like the Vitality resist that we were getting from Toad, we're going to be getting flat energy of 150, and you're getting a flat health bump of 100. Those two stats on their own are very good, especially early game, because that energy bar is going to be pretty small. But moreover, you are going, once you finish Quill, you're going to get a percentage increase to both your defensive ability, which is incredibly important for staying alive, and a % increase to your entire energy bar. So I think I've made my point about the energy bar, and that is the last bit of Quill that's going to be important. Ultimately, those Eldritch and Ascendant points in your devotion tree are going to get you closer to Leviathan for that cold damage later on, but for the time being, like I said, not super flashy abilities. However, we are going to get one more activatable devotion ability here, and that is going to come in the form of Murmur, the Mistress of Rumors. Murmur is the whole reason that we need to have Mantis unlocked, and the requirements for Murmur are going to be 6 Eldritch, which is 6 green, 6 Primordial, which is blue, and 3 Chaos, which are pink. I know, it seems like a lot. It's a pretty hefty down payment for a devotion, if we're being honest, which is why we have to take 1 point into the crossroads of pink just to get that 3 points necessary. That said though, Murmur does give us a bunch of really good stats, especially for our build, and just kind of really good stats, period. Now, I think stats are probably easy to start with because really that's the basic part of every devotion. And Murmur is one of those that's going to be buffing all of the damage types that we have in this build, along with some extras that we may end up having decent damage in, but definitely won't be a focus. That said, you're going to start with cold and acid damage. She buffs those two, and that is a Nightblade specific combination. Nightblades love cold and love acid, and there's piercing in their kit as well, so you can see 2 out of 3 ain't bad when it comes to Murmur. Also, you're going to get Frostburn damage, and basically anywhere that there is cold damage, you can see Frostburn coming along too. So, big buffs to those damage types that are going to help scale us further up as the difficulty increases. But you're also going to be picking up a good chunk of defensive ability with Murmur on top of some flat health. It gives you 200 health, and since, again, we're early on, having a kind of teeny-weeny health bar gets progressively bigger with a good chunk like this added to it. So with the health benefits, with the defensive ability increase, we're harder to hit, we can take more hits, and we're going to be doing all sorts of damage. All that being said though, these are easy stats to wrap your mind around. Even easier than that, you are going to get 15% vitality resistance. If we're comparing that to Quill and Toad, which only gave us 8% of the resistances that those guys offer, this is a marked improvement, and because Murmur is kind of a middle tier devotion, it's totally understandable. Murmur is not only going to be one of those things that you need to build towards Leviathan, she's also going to be extremely powerful in her own right. The last couple stats that she comes with are going to carry you throughout your entire experience, and those are a % increase to your dodge and deflect stats. If you don't know what that is, it says it right there on the devotion. It is a chance to avoid melee attacks and a chance to avoid projectiles. This is yet another stat that is really great for the Nightblade because of our pneumatic burst and the shadow dance upgrade that we take for it. That is going to be 3% added on to an already big number, which should be about 15% at this point with the points into Shadow Dance. So basically, we're getting a bump to a couple stats that will be incredibly good later on. Even early on, they're going to be very good, but increasing them at any point possible is going to be super helpful. All the passive stats out of the way, Murmur has one more very fun thing going on, and that is her ability. We'll be using Rumor with a 15% chance on attack when you equip this to Vire's Might. Now, as far as the ability itself, it's going to do cold and acid damage, and it's only a 1-second recharge, so it can happen quite often. It's also a 4-second duration, so this is going to be happening to enemies pretty consistently. The super important thing about Rumor, however, isn't the damage that it does. It is going to be the reduction in offensive ability. Not only that, but it's going to be reducing your enemy's cold and acid resistance, so you'll be doing more damage to them and forcing them to deal less damage to you because their offensive ability is going to be dropping. This ability it's really hard to see, especially with a lot of the different things going on in Grimdawn, all the effects that'll happen in any given kit at any given time, but you'll see Rumor go off and it looks like a bunch of little bubbles. The really good thing about having this equipped to Vire's Might is that you can also activate it through your Volcanic Stride. which is really the whole reason that we even put a point into a volcanic stride, because ultimately it's fire on the ground, and this isn't going to be a fire damage build. It's going to be a build that turns Vire's Might into a cold damage ability, but that carpet of fire that just sits there and does damage for a couple of seconds can activate some really, really good effects through the Murmur Devotion. This devotion is so good, in fact, and it works so well with Vire's Might, that the only reason that we may end up changing Vire's Might later is if we need to put it onto Leviathan. Now, Leviathan has its own ability and its own amount of damage that comes along with that ability, but the cooldown is a little bit longer, and it really is just going to be flat damage as compared to Rumor's more damage and utility combination. For the time being, Rumor and Vire's Might go together incredibly well, and you should hold on to that combination until you get all the way to the end to unlock Leviathan. Now, that being said, Rumor is the last devotion that we can unlock at this level, so you don't have to worry too hard about making that decision right now, but in the next video we should have all of the devotions unlocked and we'll be well into Elite, so you can see how the full devotion tree breaks out and synergizes with everything going on. As of this video though, we do still have more to talk about because there is a whole bunch of monster infrequent gear that is attainable at or before level 50 that is going to influence your build pretty heavily. Now, with the most recent update to Grimdawn, a lot of these monster infrequents are going to be pretty easy to farm because the monsters that drop them have I think a guarantee to drop them now, if I remember right from the patch notes. If it's not a guarantee, they are at least very likely to drop them. So the items, the gear that we're going to be looking at here is pretty easy to find. You just may have to do it a couple times to nail it down early on. So the first one I'm going to talk about, we mentioned a little bit in the last video, and that is Alkimos's War Sword. This one is a two-handed weapon, and this is basically your big damage spike when it comes to this build. This is going to drop from Alkimos, so you will end up having to run through the Steps of Torment key dungeon. If you don't get it on the first try, you're going to have to do it a couple more times, because you do have to go all the way through the dungeon to get it from that big bad boy. The good news though, when you get this, you're going to get a whole bunch of offensive ability. You're going to be getting attack speed. You're getting 4 points into both Pneumatic Burst and Ascension, and this actually modifies your Pneumatic Burst as well as your Vire's Might. So this is why Vire's Might is going to be a cold skill rather than a fire skill. But when you pick this up, you get 10% extra health healed from Pneumatic Burst. You get Pneumatic Burst to add on a flat 32 cold damage at level 36 with this item, and then you are going to convert 100% of your fire damage to cold damage using Pneumatic Burst. That in and of itself is pretty great, but things just keep getting better because we're going to modify Vire's Might next. You're going to add on a flat 380 cold damage to Vire's Might, and you're going to convert 100% of the physical damage that Vire's Might does into cold damage. So this is going to be a completely, well, almost completely cold damage sword for that ability. And then lastly, this is probably the coolest part of this item, you have a 20% chance to completely reset the cooldown of Vire's Might. Now, that might sound a little bit low to you, but if you've been keeping up with the video at all, you may have seen a couple instances of the character dashing and dashing and dashing and dashing all over the place, just back and forth, leaving all sorts of trails of fire everywhere, because this is a full cooldown reset that will happen at least 1 in 5 times, but I've gotten lucky enough to have it happen 3 to 4 times in succession. It's so awesome when you get a chain of resets with this sword and you just clear out a whole room with that single ability. It's so good. It feels so rewarding just to see that little hourglass pop up over your head. So no matter what level you're at with this build, if you can get all the way through the Steps of Torment dungeon, I highly recommend that you start farming this right away. Even though you can't use the sword until you get to level 36, having it available, getting even, if you wanted to get multiple rolls of it and farm it out that way, even doing the Steps of Torment will get you up to that level 36 quicker. But once you have this in your inventory, your whole build is going to absolutely skyrocket in damage once you hit level 36 and you can equip it. So get this ASAP, make it happen, and your whole journey from 36 to 50 and onward will get much quicker, much easier, and much more fun. Now, the other item that I want to mention, at least at this point, that you can get early on, isn't necessarily a monster infrequent, but it does have some unique features that you can only get with this belt. So it's called the Legion belt, and this is something that you'll need a blueprint for that you will craft at the blacksmith. Since it's called the Legion belt, you can probably assume that you'll get it from the Black Legion quartermaster, and you get that in Homestead. But basically, this is going to give you cold and frostburn damage, and it's going to give you 1 to all skills in Nightblade, and it's only got a level 35 requirement, so you can get this around the same time as the War Sword and have it give you a pretty big bump. It also gives you the ability to use Flash Freeze in a 10% outing. So basically 10% chance on attack, you will Flash Freeze for cold damage, a chance to freeze, and a chance to slow in about a 5-meter area around. It's pretty helpful if we're being honest, and considering that CC is a really effective tool at not getting, beaten up by 100 monsters that are surrounding you, it's incredibly effective for how unassuming it is. So I highly recommend picking up this belt early, because not only is that +1 to all skills in Nightblade really helpful, but the cold flash ability that comes with it is super good too. Now, there are 2 other monster infrequents that come along with this build, and we're going to start with the easier one to find, because you'll be farming this one while you're farming up the War Sword through the Steps of Torment, and that is going to be Ilgor's Eternal Vigil. So there is basically a mini boss inside the Steps of Torment called Ilgor, and he is going to be dropping 1 of 2 monster infrequents. Eternal Curse is the one that you don't want. Curse, it does increase the damage that your Amaras's Blade Burst can do, but that's not a very big important skill as compared to Vigil. So if you get Curse and you don't have Vigil, you can go ahead and put it on. It's not like it's a bad thing. It's giving you +3 to Blade Burst, and it's giving almost 50% damage from your weapon to Blade Burst as well. But once you inevitably find Vigil, after so many farming runs on Ilgor himself, Vigil will be doing much more for you. Now, Vigil does cold and vitality damage, and this is a metal, by the way, so the metal is going to be taking up very little space in your inventory, which is fantastic. But Vigil is going to give you cold and vitality damage buffs. It is going to give you a % health increase, and you are going to get points into Shadow Dance. Now, Vigil also shares points with the Necromancer and Drain Essence, but those are basically just wasted stats. We're not going to pay attention to those. What's really important about Vigil is that it does a huge amount of buffing Pneumatic Burst. And I'm not just being hyperbolic when I say that. Your Pneumatic Burst is actually going to get full 2 minutes of duration increase. So basically, when you hit your Pneumatic Burst, you are going to get all the buffs that it gives you for 2 solid minutes. Considering how often you'll be healing yourself anyway, this is basically a permanent passive that you just reactivate occasionally, refreshing the duration when you hit the button. Not only are you going to get that 120-second duration to the passive buffs that it gives you, it's going to add on another 8 health % restored, so your heal button gets even bigger. You're going to get a buff to cold and vitality and frostburn and vitality decay damage on top of everything else. And those buffs will yet again last for 2 whole minutes. This is 100% the metal that you are going to want to take with you all the way into late game, because Pneumatic Burst is going to be nothing but positive all the way through Ultimate and beyond. Because of the way that Shadow Dance works, because of the way that this ability is basically a new passive for you with a heal button attached to it, this is just perfect. And the earliest that you can get this is level 30. So once you are putting around in Act 2 and you are farming the Steps of Torment, this is really easily attainable and you can pick it up pretty quickly to start some really high damage spikes in your build. Now, the last item that you were going to pick up in the monster infrequent realm of things is Bloodbrier's Thorn, and this is an amulet that you'll pick up from the Pine Barrens, and in order to get there you will need a bunch of dynamite. So basically, once you are finished with Act 2 and once you're finished running through all of the Undercity to farm up your war sword and your metal, you will inevitably head over to Homestead, and before you start entering into Act 3, you're going to want to farm out the Pine Barrens missions so you can go find Bloodbriar and get this amulet. What this is going to be doing is, as far as modifying abilities, your Ring of Steel is going to lose a full second on its cooldown, and it is going to get 35% crit damage on the ability as it is. So when you have high offensive ability, you are going to have more opportunity to crit, and that means that when you do crit, your Ring of Steel is going to be critting for even more damage. Not only that, but Bloodbrier's Thorn is going to be giving you points into Circle of Slaughter, which is the Ring of Steel modifier, incredibly helpful, and you're going to get Chaos Resistance and Bleeding Resistance on this bad boy on top of everything else. There are a ton of stats actually on Bloodbrier's Thorn, including crit damage, physical and elemental damage, increases to spirit and defensive ability. It is a big stat ball of an amulet, and it is incredibly easy to farm because all you have to do is go kill Bloodbriar. If you didn't get it, you just restart, go give it another shot. Ultimately, it's worth all the stats that it provides, any amount of time that you put into farming it, so don't feel like you are just wasting away if you're not getting it right away. It is very good for your build, and it likely will translate very, very far the further that you level up. Now, there are a couple other honorable mentions for this video. These are not monster infrequents, but these are things that make the build work better, in my opinion. And that is going to be number 1, your relic, and that is a transcendent relic, by the way. That's going to be Death Chill. Death Chill gives you cold and vitality damage with a flat bump to health and attack speed, along with cold and vitality resistance and the Death Chill aura. So Death Chill, the aura, is going to give you a radius of cold and vitality damage with a chance of frostburn damage and buffs to your cold and vitality damage as well. All around very strong stats for everything that we want. Everything that we do anyway is getting buffed, and then Death Chill in the next video will lead into our next relic up. So we're just paving our way for the future. Lastly though, there is a pair of pants, and these are epic pants, so they're blue pants that you may end up finding. You don't have any way to really farm these, it's just kind of if you get lucky enough to get them, and that is the Shade Leather Leggings. These are going to give you 2 points into Knight's Chill, they give you elemental resistance, and they give you flat cunning along with a % increase to cunning, which means more critting for you. But more importantly and more defensively oriented, they are going to give you a % chance to your, it's dodge. Dodge is the avoid melee attacks stat. So that is another very big chunk of that stat that is getting added on to your already big chunk of those stats. in Shadow Dance. So these pants are just going to help you avoid even more melee damage, help you survive even longer. They're really good. I highly recommend them. They will not make it to the ultimate side of the game, but in the meantime, if you can get empowered and mythical versions of Shade Leather leggings as well, they're very, very good. So highly recommend, even if you can't find them. It's not going to break the build though. That is it for me though, everybody. Thanks so much for hanging out for this part 2, the level 50 and onwards Dervish. In our next video, we'll be looking at the elite difficulty and level 70 and upward for the Dervish. Following that, we will be over on the ultimate side of things with our level 100 ultimate cold damage Executioner Dervish, fully evolutioned and ready to go. So thank you for hanging out yet again. I'll see y'all next time. Peace out.